let's start with these trade rumors, right? As I mentioned, ESPN, they rank their top 25 players who could be on the move when the trade deadline comes, and that will be, of course, in a couple of weeks, right around the Bengals bye. November 4th is the trade deadline for the Cincinnati Bengals, and there's 3 players that they had listed in their top 25. And first, of course, is Trey Hendrickson. There's a lot of teams out there that certainly could use Trey Hendrickson. I think you can make the argument that Trey Hendrickson makes every single team better in the National Football League. But the Bengals probably aren't going to move Trey Hendrickson, right? I think they would have to go 0-2 over the course of the next 2 games in order to move him, right? And I just don't really see that happening with the Jets, of course, being on the docket this week, and then the Bears after that. Going into the Pittsburgh game, it's like if you kind of eliminate yourself here, if you go 1-2 going into the bye, of course 0-3 kind of eliminates you there as well, and then maybe you look to move Trey Hendrickson. Of course, I view this to be his final year in Cincinnati, right? I don't think he is going to continue to be a Cincinnati Bengal after this year. And if you could perhaps get a draft pick for Trey Hendrickson, I think there was some people that would be definitely interested in doing that. And I think that would be the right call. But at this point, your season has life, right? You beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. You look, you're 3-4. The AFC as a conference is weak from top to bottom here at this point. And, I think that certainly gives you an opportunity to perhaps be sticking around later in the year. And, of course, you're going to want one of your best players if that is the case. So ESPN had him ranked at number 1. But, again, you got to lose these next 2 games for him to be on the move, because you're going to have some life as it relates to your season here at this point. With Trey Hendrickson, there's absolutely no reason to move off him here at this point. Obviously, the Eagles is a team that would be interested, right? Howie Roseman, their general manager, of course, is always trying to make some moves, adjust their roster, be a little bit better each and every week. I think the Eagles are still very much a threat. Lou Anarumo, a guy that we'll talk about a little bit here on the show with Indianapolis. You've got former Bengals going over there. Jermaine Pratt, certainly the latest to do it. Lou Anarumo has a great defense this year for the Indianapolis Colts, and they certainly could use another pass rusher in Trey Hendrickson. I think the popular team that's been floated around is certainly the San Francisco 49ers, all the injuries that they're dealing with, right? They lost Fred Warner here recently. Nick Bosa, they lost him a few weeks ago, and that's a team where Kyle Shanahan, he looks like the front runner for Coach of the Year, and they're seemingly finding ways to win games despite the fact that obviously guys continue to get hurt, and they're still winning. It's next man up. At some point, it feels like that's going to run out, right? But Trey Hendrickson certainly would fit in well with that defense. But again, ESPN has him at number 1. The Bengals aren't going to make that type of move unless they lose these next 2 games. But these other 2 names that ESPN did list are very interesting. And that first name is Logan Wilson, and they have him at the 11th spot in the top 25 as it relates to players that could be moved at the deadline. The Bengals obviously are kind of, not fully moving off Logan Wilson, but they, seemingly have gone with Barrett Carter there at that linebacker spot, and Logan Wilson, a captain, not starting as much as he once was. And the Bengals, or ESPN has it listed as a 60% chance that the Bengals trade Logan Wilson. I think that's very interesting. The Bengals, as an organization, of course, not known to make many trades. They kind of broke that streak here this year with Joe Flacco, of course, being acquired in a trade. And then you had Khalil Herbert being acquired in a trade at the deadline last year for a 7th-round pick. Now, to be honest with you, I have no idea what you would get back in return for Logan Wilson. I assume it's just going to be a day 3 pick, right, and really nothing more than that. But I think Logan Wilson can still play in this league. And I think he's a guy that, with a more veteran defense, could step up and make some things happen. Is he the same player he was early in his career? No, absolutely not. But this is a guy that, has a nose for the football, right? We've seen him, several PBUs, several interceptions there, of course, throughout his time as a Cincinnati Bengal. And perhaps you could move him for a later pick. This kind of would surprise me. ESPN, again, has it listed at 60%. That seems a little bit high. I think at some point the Bengals are going to want to have some experience in that linebacker room. I think there's value with Logan Wilson still being on this team, even if he is getting phased out a little bit more for Barrett Carter. And, of course, in the NFL, you always need depth. And, I don't think you're going to get a player back in return. It'd probably just be a day 3 pick. And, yeah, you might want to get that pick that you lost for Joe Flacco, but I think there's more value to keeping Logan Wilson. I was very surprised that ESPN had that at 60%. Some teams involved that they could believe would trade For Logan Wilson include the Dallas Cowboys, the San Francisco 49ers, the Buffalo Bills, and the Indianapolis Colts. All could use a linebacker, all could use a veteran. And, I don't think he's completely washed, right? Like, I still think he has some good football ahead of him. Might not be here in Cincinnati and maybe make a move in the offseason, but just getting rid of him for a day 3 pick when you have all that inexperience in the linebacker room, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But that is interesting that he is on this list and all the way up at the 11th spot for ESPN as it relates to their top 25 guys that could potentially be moved at the deadline. And at the 20 spot, now this one I think there is a chance that it could happen, and that is Cam Taylor-Britt. ESPN lists that there is a 25% chance in their eyes that they move off of CTB, the Cincinnati Bengals, at the trade deadline. Teams in the mix include the Colts, the Commanders, and the Eagles. Look, Cam Taylor-Britt, I wouldn't say he was fully a bust because at the beginning of his career, he was very productive here in Cincinnati. But the past 2 years certainly have not lived up to the expectation that the Bengals had for him. And the expectation was that he would come in and be their cornerback 1 these past 2 years. He would face off against the best receiver on the other team. And he hasn't done a good job of that, obviously. And, he found ways to get benched last year, right? He was in and out of the lineup. When he was in, it wasn't very good. This year, they kind of came in, gave him another opportunity to be the starter, and next thing you know, he's a healthy scratch last week. So, that whole experiment kind of feels like it has run its course. Like, if you get benched several different times throughout your career in a spot and you're a healthy scratch now at some point as well, it just kind of feels like your time here in Cincinnati has come to a close. Maybe Cam Taylor-Britt needs a fresh start, and there are definitely teams out there that could use him. I could totally see Howie Roseman rolling the dice on CTB in Philadelphia. And candidly, it wouldn't surprise me if he kind of revitalized his career there in Philadelphia to some degree. They're starving for another corner. Quinyon Mitchell, of course, is banged up, and they already had, that second corner spot was already a weakness for Philadelphia when you're talking about guys like Adoree Jackson and Keely Ringo. So Philadelphia is certainly a team to monitor for Cam Taylor-Britt, and, I think you could potentially get back, a draft pick in return, which I think in that situation, it would be better than, I'd feel more comfortable than moving off of Logan Wilson, right? CTB has had his troubles, and if you move off him, you're in a spot where I don't think it hurts you as much. Now, you're going to need depth at that spot, right? What's the likelihood that all DJ Turner and Dax Hill and Josh Newton all get through the rest of the year healthy and not miss any time? That's very unlikely, right? Especially at that type of position like a cornerback. But I think the Bengals are kind of just going in a different direction. Clearly they feel better about a guy like Marco Wilson than a guy like Cam Taylor-Britt. And something, I was thinking about the other day that could be interesting is if they had considered a position switch for Cam Taylor-Britt. The Bengals obviously need help at safety because Geno Stone just simply is not good whatsoever. He flat out stinks. Could they perhaps move him to a safety spot? I don't know if CTB has ever played safety before, but the traits are there for Cam Taylor-Britt. Like, he can run, he's got speed, and he can hit you, right? It's just kind of the coverage stuff and being at the wrong spot. I can honestly see Cam Taylor-Britt being a solid safety in this league, and I wonder if that's something that Al Golden has, even floated around, or Zach Taylor as a potential possibility for Cincinnati. I kind of would like to see him deployed as that, right? Geno Stone, it ain't working, and you keep rolling it out each and every week, and it seemingly gets worse every single week. Geno Stone is not the answer. He is not going to be the answer. You have to lick your wounds and understand that move that you made when you signed him in free agency, gave him that 2-year deal, you missed. That's okay. It happens. Sometimes you swing, sometimes you miss, but you can't keep rolling him out there at that spot. We talk about Tyson Anderson, right? Your special teams ace. Clearly, he has not done enough in practice to be given an opportunity to potentially be your starting safety. We saw it last year. We were kind of like, Geno Stone, it ain't working. Are you going to try Tyson Anderson? They didn't even try it once last year. They haven't even tried it once yet this year to this point. So I think that kind of tells you everything you need to know about Tyson Anderson being a potential starter for the Cincinnati Bengals at that safety spot. It just isn't going to happen. But Cam Taylor-Britt could be very, very interesting at that spot. And it can't really get much worse than Geno Stone, right? You throw him out there, as I mentioned, he's got great speed. He can hit you, He's got the traits. It's just been some of the stuff upstairs about him not necessarily being in the right spot at the right time and just lapses in coverage, right? I think the skills are still there for him to be a quality NFL player, right? This guy was a second-round pick. He's played good football in the past. He just has struggled immensely the past couple of years. And you wonder with Cam Taylor-Britt, there's some, off-the-field stuff. You hear it around town. Oh, you always see Cam Taylor-Britt out enjoying himself on the town. It can't be happening during the football season, right? So maybe it's a maturity issue that the Bengals are having with him, and that's why he's a healthy scratch. But I think testing him out at safety could be something that I would consider. I'm sure the coaching staff has discussed it. But if not, I'm ready to move him here at this point. See if you can't get that draft pick back that you lost for Joe Flacco. Or, maybe you can get, a player back. Because I think there is some interest out on the open market for Cam Taylor-Britt at the trade deadline. Again, Cincinnati doesn't really make the trades, but they've kind of broken what they've done as an organization here of late, right? With the trade for Joe Flacco, paying Jamar Chase and T. Higgins this offseason, trading for Khalil Herbert at the deadline last year. So this isn't necessarily the same old Bengals. We're seeing some changes how they operate as an organization, a little bit more aggressive, making some decisions they typically don't make, which, by the way, they needed to do this. It's the NFL, and they were operating, it was the archaic stage, right? Because they weren't developing and changing with the times, and they're starting to do that a little bit more. So maybe a trade at the deadline is something that could actually happen for this team. Of the three guys I just mentioned, I think Cam Taylor-Britt would be at the top of that list for me. But I was very surprised that ESPN had it as a 60% chance they trade Logan Wilson. That seems way too high for me. I think that would be a mistake. But, that ultimately is something that obviously could happen. Trey Hendrickson, you got to go 0-2 over the next 2 weeks if you're going to move him. And even then, I'm not convinced Cincinnati would do it. But there is obviously lots of people that would be interested in his services. I expect him to play this week against the Jets. Has the back injury, of course, or the hip injury that cost him last week. But I expect him to be back out there, and the Bengals certainly could use him based on what happened in the game against Pittsburgh last week. Certainly struggled getting to the passer and getting to Aaron Rodgers.